Hey everybody, this is Vince Miller. Thank you so much for joining me for our devotional. Today we're in Job chapter 15, verse 7, which reads like this. It says, "Are you the first man who was born, or were you brought forth before the hills?" Now, let's remember that each one of Job's friends gets a turn to speak and to counsel Job on the reason for his present suffering. And in chapter 15, where we are today, we begin round 2 with each of his 3 friends. So now we're back to the first of Job's friends, and his name is Eliphaz. And Eliphaz is still convinced that Job is guilty of sin, which is the reason for his suffering. But now he's going to notch it up by proposing that Job's claim of suffering as a righteous person is preposterous. He claims that this would be like comparing himself to the sinless state of Adam before the fall, which is what we read here. So here's a little historical caveat for you today. Based on all the internal evidence found in the book of Job, we conclude that Job is one of the earliest books in the entire Bible. Most theologians believe with high probability that Moses wrote the book, and he probably wrote it before he even wrote the first 5 books of the Bible, what we commonly call the Pentateuch: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. But what's especially interesting is that Job and Moses lived after the flood. And this is important because the flood was God's punishment for humanity's perpetual disobedience. What was once good in the garden was given over to increasing sin and selfishness. Therefore, God destroyed life on earth because he was grieved. He was grieved that he made man, saw that the intentions of man's heart was nothing but evil. And remember, God did save a few people, specifically Noah and his family. Then from Noah's family, a new genealogy originated, and Job was one of those descendants, as were Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. And I would assume that the flood and Adam's fall were on their mind as they're contemplating the reason for Job's suffering. And in the end, they've concluded that there is this cause and effect relationship between disobedience and God's punishment and obedience and God's blessing. Now, it would be easy to conclude this if you assume Noah is righteous and his righteousness actually saved him. But Noah and his family weren't saved by Noah's righteousness. They were saved by God's favor, and his favor was evidenced by Noah's faith. For proof of this, you just got to turn to Genesis 6:8, read that, and then Hebrews 11:7. Note this: Noah was a sinner, just like we were sinners. There is nothing righteous that he could do to be saved. It was simply God's favor that saved him and his family. Remember, God is about to destroy all mankind because all mankind grieved him, including Noah. Now, I wonder if some of Eliphaz's wrong theological misconceptions here came from drawing a very wrong conclusion and making a wrong connection. Now, I don't know this for sure, but these 3 men definitely picked up their corrupt reasoning somewhere. And they're using historical events as evidence for their position. Eliphaz does so here. He reaches way back to Adam in the garden, pre-fall, for more evidence. This is called deductive reasoning. Deductive reasoning is where we develop a hypothesis and then look for evidence to prove that point. But their reasoning has resulted in them bending the truth in a direction that actually suits them. And why do they do this? Because we all want to believe that if you do what is right and righteous, you're going to receive a blessing. We all want to believe that. We all want to believe that if we attend to our marriages righteously and raise our kids to honor God and work ethically in our business and love our neighbors, that everything's going to work out for us and that God's going to bless us. We all believe that. We want to, right? But that's not the case. You know that's not the case. And what we learn from these 3 men here is that when our reasoning is corrupted by selfish tendencies, we will find ways to mold God to our views and our ways. A.W. Tozer once said this: "Left to ourselves, we tend to immediately reduce God to manageable terms." Let me say that again. Left to ourselves, we tend to immediately reduce God to manageable terms. And Tozer's point is this, is that when we're left to ourselves, using deductive reasoning, we will find ways to make God smaller and make us bigger. And this is what Eliphaz is doing. And he's using biblical events to prove his selfish hypothesis. But here's a question for you today to make it personal. Where in your mind do you try to get God to behave in a way that fits what you hope he will do, so he will be who you hope he will be? Think about that. Seriously, where in your mind do you try to get God to behave in a way that fits what you hope he will do, so he will be who you hope he will be? We all do this in one way or another. I do this as well. We do this in our marriages when we hope our spouses will feel, think, and act in a certain way. And then we ask God to do this for us. Or we do the same with our children and hope God will help them to turn out the way that we want them to turn out. And even pray that God will do this for us. We do this in our dreams or with our careers, hoping that God will point us down a specific direction or help us to achieve something we have conceived only in our minds. But however you do it, just stop doing it. Let God be God. Let him be even bigger than how you want him to behave and what you hope he will do. But still bring your requests to him, but bring them to him with no expectations. And then when he answers, accept his answer. And don't try to make a connection to something you did, only to rob glory from God in something great that he has done. Well, thanks for joining me for our devotional today. I hope you loved it. Share it with someone else, and I'll see you right back here again tomorrow.